Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale. And honestly, this is probably our 140-something episode. Shane probably knows that number offhand. There is no doubt, Shane, that we have had a more disgusting week of games across the board. The men's team will, you all know if you're listening to this podcast, what happened on Saturday. The women's team got swept this weekend in Oregon. The baseball team has had a rough start to the weekend.
Shout out to the beach volleyball team for saving our weekend.
You know, what I always said about, when people say, like, why do you like doing Wildcat Country? Well, we have a great time, Shane and I bantering and you know, talking to guests and everything. But it's also cathartic when we lose. And this is one of those episodes, to be honest with you. Now, we have a great guest on in the second segment, Jerry Palm, CBS Sports expert bracketologist, going to join us to explain the implications of Arizona's loss to Arizona State. But we're going to kind of break this down and get our frustrations out together. Right, Shane?
Yeah, so we were both in different places when this game took place. You were at the Cubs spring training opener.
I was
at a seller for the first time at the card show, the Chandler Gilbert card show. And shout out to the folks who came out to see us, because I mentioned on the Wildcat Country, and we had a couple of podcast fans who came out to see us, and we made a couple trades with them. We appreciate that. But yeah, it was toward the end of the show where everyone was breaking down their stuff, and I was keeping an eye on the score of the game. I turned it on the last couple of minutes because I saw it was close, and I have Fubo, it's the over the top streaming service, so it was a little behind, and so right before that last shot, I hear someone at the other end of the card show yells out, "Oh my God, ASU just hit a half court shot to beat U of A." Right before I saw the shot on my phone. I'm like, and like 2 seconds later it happened. So like just in those 2 seconds were like in slow motion, like, holy shit, did that just really happen? And sure enough, I saw it on my phone with my own eyes. Let me get this out of the way, because I texted you after the game. I could not imagine drawing up a scenario in which that would have been one more gut-wrenching, disgusting loss. Okay, all the elements, senior day. They're up 10 with 5 minutes left. They lose the way they did. It was ridiculous on so many ways. But before we get into buy or sell, I want to mention a couple things. I think ASU benefited from being in total screw it mode in that game. It reminded me of another game that's probably a sore spot for you, the Packers-Lions regular season finale, where the Lions played loose, just threw everything at the Packers, knowing it wasn't going to matter. They weren't going to the playoffs. ASU, they're not a great team, but they're a good team that was in complete screw it mode. And that's a dangerous team. They were desperate. They knew they needed to, they need to win over U of A and probably more to get into the tournament. And they knew based on the second half of their game in Tempe that they can hang with Arizona. Okay. And so that made for a dangerous team. And yes, Arizona still should have won, but that was a major factor. The other thing is, I didn't really care for Tommy Lloyd's comments after the game, or at least some of them. He started this press conference by saying he chalked it up basically to just being a great game between two good teams, and ASU needed a half court shot to beat us, and I'll take that every time. No criticism of his team whatsoever. He criticized Tubelis a little bit later on for his defense or lack thereof, but I wanted to see a little bit more. They didn't play well defensively. I think it was their first loss under Tommy Lloyd when they scored 80 points. They blew a 10-point lead with 5 minutes left. They didn't shoot free throws well. I don't expect him to hang his head in the post-game press conference, but the only anger I saw from him was toward the media, because I think he has a general disdain for a lot of the questions asked of him, and I don't think he hides it especially well. So a little disappointed in that. Still think he's a great coach. Fantastic. I have a lot of faith they're going to be good under him for a long time, but I wasn't crazy about those two things.
That's fair. We have a lot to talk about on the show, so we might as well get into it. It's Buy or Sell, presented by our friends at Ice Shaker. Go to iceshaker.com and get one of those beauties that is behind. It's in Shane's hand if you're watching the YouTube stream, or behind both of us on our live streams here. You can go to iceshaker.com, use promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C, and get $5 off. Or you can go to fanatics.com and get an Arizona one, not Wildcat Country, but an Arizona one. Check that out. Ice Shaker, fanatics.com or iceshaker.com. All right, Shane, number one buy or sell. Let's just get right to it. There's a lot to break down from this game. Number one, Shane, heading into this weekend in LA against USC and UCLA, the panic is real. Buy or sell?
I'm going to sell it. I don't feel any differently about this team, Eric, than I did before the game. And if ASU had missed that shot, I wouldn't feel any differently. They are capable of beating anyone in the country. They're also capable of losing to some bad teams. I think this is a classic situation where they could lose to a 14 or 15 seed in the NCAA tournament, or they could go on and win the whole thing. Hasn't really changed anything. When this team decides to turn it on, they play very well. There are a lot of different elements going into that game. The emotion of senior day, ASU in desperation mode, and Arizona kind of took their foot off the gas, and some other things I know we're going to get into. So no, I don't think so. And even if they lose at USC and UCLA, yeah, it's going to hurt their seeding in the NCAA tournament, but I've seen enough from this team to believe they can beat anyone when they play their best. And that hasn't changed for me.
Okay. You guys are going to be surprised with my answer on this one. Yeah. Most people listening are like, oh, Cohen's going to panic for sure. The answer is no, I'm not. I'm not panicked. ASU hit a fluky shot, and they played a great game from what I saw. I was watching it, a spring training game. There was no signal at Sloan Park, by the way. I got it literally in the last 20 seconds, saw Pelle Larsson go to the rim. ASU missed a shot. Umar Ballo goes 1 out of 2 at the free throw line. We'll break down that whole sequence.
Yeah.
But, so I just been monitoring on my phone what I could get, the stats there, and going back and looking at highlights. I mean, Arizona played well. Offensively, especially, and defensively, not so great, but at the free throw lines where they struggled. And that is, if there's anything, that's what I'm concerned about. Now, I think the key is this weekend, you got to get a split. I don't care who you beat. I don't care if you beat USC or UCLA. You got to get a split. I think you got to
get a split in order to do what?
To get a top 3 seed.
Top 3. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's on the table, where I think a split this weekend and win your first game on Thursday next weekend. And I think a top 3 seed, because of the quality wins, and we'll ask Jerry Palm about this, is in play. I think if you get swept this weekend going into the Pac-12 tournament, you're darn right I'm gonna be panicked. I mean, simple as that. So the answer is I'm gonna sell this one. Now, number 2, Shane. Tommy Lloyd made a very foolish decision to start the seniors, including walk-ons, on Saturday. Buy or sell?
So it's about a 25-minute drive from the car show to back home. And I thought about a lot of different things on the way home, including that. And on the one hand, look, Arizona was up 10 with 5 minutes left. I know I've mentioned that 3 times already, but at home, that should be enough. They should have put ASU away. So it's hard to blame it completely on that. But there is an argument that, okay, ASU was ahead 12-9 at the first media timeout, and when the walk-ons were still in there. That gives ASU a little bit of confidence. Hey, we can hang with these guys. This crowd can't affect us. We can overcome these guys. We can hang with them just like we did in the second half of the last game. So, and Tommy Lloyd mentioned after the game, he was going back and forth on whether to do that the night before, and he decided ultimately to do it. So I'm going to sell that. I'm going to blame, like, the primary source of blame, or even the secondary source of blame, was on playing the walk-ons for that long. That it's a significant stretch of the game. It's about 10% of the game. But in hindsight, could there be like some sort of ripple effect to where, ASU gets some momentum, they take an early lead, and that impacts how the rest of the game plays out? Yeah, you can argue that. I'm going to sell it, but I will admit it is something that came into my mind as I was making that drive home yesterday.
I'm gonna buy it. I'm sorry. I know you want to do something nice for the seniors, but then call a timeout a minute into the game. There's no reason to play him for 3 minutes. It's just in a game like this where you need to get momentum. You haven't played all week. You're not playing Cal. You're not playing Oregon State. You're playing ASU, who's a desperate team. It's just stupid. It's just flat out stupid. I don't want to sit here and bash Tommy Lloyd, because I'm not going to, but it's flat out stupid. Period. End of paragraph. It's flat out dumb.
Tommy Lloyd's an arrogant guy, and I don't say that in a disdainful way. He just is. You remember what he said after they won the Pac-12 Tournament championship? So we're going to go to the tournament. We're going to kick some ass. That is who he is. And he believed that, look, we can beat these guys with our walk-ons starting for the first.
Stupid. It's stupid.
But here's the thing. They should have, and they could have.
They should have. Great.
But I agree that I'm fine with having them start. It's sort of a tradition to let the seniors start, but get them out at the first dead ball, or a minute into the game. I agree with you on that.
Give a take foul have one of those guys give a take foul and get out of the game. I mean, it's just the way it is. Even if Arizona had won, I was going to have this as one of the questions, Shane, and I was going to say it's stupid. I'm sorry, but you're not a 12 and 18 team where you can do this. You're a team that is fighting.
It's a fair point.
So I'm sorry. And number 3, I don't want to make this a Tommy Lloyd bash session, but this is something that people have talked about, and so I want to bring it up here. Umar Ballo not being instructed to miss the second free throw, up 1 with 2.7 seconds left, was a terrible coaching decision by yourself.
Well, first of all, I'll buy it, but I like to back up for a second because we really haven't talked about Arizona's free throw shooting. It's been bad for a while, and we haven't talked about it because Arizona keeps winning. Yep. But if they keep shooting below 70% from the line, it's going to cost them an NCAA tournament game. And in particular, Pelle Larsson missed 3 free throws against ASU. He's just 86.3% free throw shooter or something like that, and he missed 3 of them. So, yeah, if they shoot closer to where they probably should be, which is closer to 75%, then it's not an issue. As far as the end of the game, worst case scenario, you miss the first, so now a 3-pointer wins the game for ASU. And then you make the second. You allow them to do an inbounds play. They didn't have any timeouts left, but it allowed them to do a set play. And they didn't do a good job defending that play either. But I understand you don't want to foul on a half-court shot. So I agree with that. Yeah, I sort of get that. But yeah, one thing that went through my head is maybe Tommy Lloyd did instruct Ballo to miss it, because I've seen instances where guys try to miss late in games like that, and the NBA too, and they make it on accident. But Tommy Lloyd said after the game he didn't do that, and maybe he should have. Yes, he should have. Again, a lot of reasons to blame. A lot of things to blame for that loss, and the fact that ASU even had a chance to win is not a good sign. But yeah, that is a basic coaching thing. In that situation, you can't advance the ball to half court, unlike on the women's side or in the NBA. Yeah, you should have missed it, and ASU probably wouldn't have gotten off the look that they had. Again, it was still ridiculous that Desmond Cambridge made that shot, but they wouldn't have had that opportunity if he had missed that free throw.
I agree with that. So I'm going to buy this one. I mean, the word terrible is, I maybe overstated a little bit, but the fact is, you coach them. It's awareness, and it's you miss the free throw. The whole defense thing, like defend a 60-foot shot, like. I mean, if a guy makes it like that, it happens. What are the odds he does that? Like, if you gave him 10 tries, he's probably making 1, right?
Yeah.
If you gave him 20 tries, he's maybe making 1 or 2. I mean, he just happened to hit a perfect shot. And it wasn't like it was a 20-foot shot. It was a 60-footer, off one leg that he drilled a swish. I mean, I had a bad feeling. I was watching with my buddy at the game, and I was like, something doesn't sit right if Ballo misses these.
I went back and watched some of it as much as I could stomach, and there was just that vibe to the game, like where ASU was very confident and they were playing with like a chip on their shoulder, and it had the feeling that maybe it was going to go down like that. And I didn't think it was going to be a half court heave, but I guess I wasn't terribly shocked. And then there was that sense of dread late in the game that didn't go away, and turned out there was a good reason for that.
Yeah, what's weird is when I'm watching with my buddy on my phone, and he's like, when the shot was in there, he goes, "Oh, miss," and I was like, and I just was silent. Because I thought it was short at first. So I'm like, it's either short or this is dead on. And that split second when you're watching something, I mean, he made a good shot, but this end of game sequence for Arizona was not good. It was brutal.
Agreed.
And Tommy's going to learn from it. But the fact that ASU, I mean, let's be honest, Shane, this is the greatest moment they probably ever had in their basketball program.
It's going to be on their highlight reel for the next 20 or 30 years.
Forever, Shane. And that's the worst part about it. It's just like the blocked extra point in a way.
That's right up there. Yeah.
That one's worse, in my opinion. This was, you still continue to play. And listen, if Arizona goes to the Final Four, we're not remembering this.
Yeah. Look, if this loss propels them to the Final Four, it'll all be worth it. If they don't, it just sucks.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was bad. Now, number 4, Shane, if you were an Arizona player with eligibility remaining, but faced a legitimate option to leave, excuse me, Exulis Tubelis, Saturday's ending would potentially bring you back to the Wildcats for another year. Because it was your home finale is what I mean.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes to how we just ended the last question. If Arizona gets to the Final Four, then maybe that's a moot point, and it's sort of a distant memory. I don't necessarily think that what happens in the NCAA tournament is going to make a major decision, is going to cause him to Bellis to go either way or anyone else to go either way. I think that's going to be a broader view than that. What's best for them? How can they? It comes down to how can they make the most money. And the short term and the long term. That's what it comes down to. And that's fine. Winning championships is great, but every single player on Arizona's team has bigger things in mind. Right now, they're focused on winning a championship. Once the season's over, one way or the other, it comes down to how can I take the next step in my career to make the most money? And that's okay. So I get what you're saying. I do remember, and I wrote my first book about the issue UVA football rivalry, for those who don't know. I talked to, I tried to make a fair and balanced book, and I talked to some ASU players who said they had a big chip on their shoulder after they lost on the last second field goal to U of A in '95. And that sort of brought them all closer together. And they all came back, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't they weren't going to lose again, and they went on and won and got to the Rose Bowl in '96. We don't want to hear about ASU. It's just an example of how sometimes what happens in one season can propel you to the next. But this is just such a business, especially nowadays. I don't think that what happens on the court is going to impact Tabellus or anyone else's decision the rest of the way.
Okay, fair. I would say that yes. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I don't think it's a huge factor. So I'll probably sell that. I actually agree with you there. All right, number 5, Shane. Azuolas Tubelis is no longer the front runner for Pac-12 Player of the Year after what we've seen lately.
I'm going to sell it. I think he'll still find a way. I think he'll finish strong, and I think the question is who would leapfrog him in your opinion if he's not
Jaime Jaquez. I mean,
Jaquez.
Because UCLA, yeah, and we're recording this in all transparency. We're recording this on Sunday afternoon, so UCLA has not played yet against Colorado.
They're playing right now, I think, as we're recording.
Yeah,
this.
okay, they're playing right now. Listen, I think UCLA is going to win this conference by multiple games at that point. And Tubelis' play has kind of tailed off a little bit since his amazing game against Oregon. I think that he probably
look at it this way. Maybe he's going to get the crappy games out of the way before the tournament this year, and he'll turn it into the NCAA tournament.
I think the winner of the game next Saturday between UCLA and Arizona, the winner of that game, their star player gets the Pac-12 Player of the Year.
Could be
simple as that. I mean, if Arizona beats UCLA twice during the regular season, I think Tubelis probably is a Pac-12 Player of the Year. If
not, they just do best player on the best team and keep it that simple.
Right, exactly. And I think that's probably what it is. Okay, so we'll keep that one simple. Let's transition over to the women. I mean, it was another brutal weekend against the Oregon schools on the road. Just not a good performance. So Arizona's the number 4 seed in the Pac-12 tournament. We'll predict that later. But buy or sell, Shane, the Pac-12 tournament means nothing to the Lady Wildcats. It's pretty much a top 4 seed, and home games are out the window at this point in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Jerry Palm about this because the question as to how big a deal conference tournaments are, and maybe they're a bigger deal on the women's side than on the men's or vice versa. But yeah, I think 4 seeds out the window. Those were 2 bad losses. I mean, Oregon still, I know they had a big losing streak, but they're still on the tournament bubble. The Oregon State game was bad. It was just bad. And I don't think if they go in and they beat UCLA and they beat Stanford and they win the whole thing, maybe they still salvage a 4. But it's concerning. They've been a very up and down team. It looks like maybe they're starting to click. They have a lot of new pieces. They're getting it together. They beat Utah. They beat Colorado. I know it's a tough trip late in the year against the Oregon schools. They should have at least beaten Oregon State. And they were behind big in that game until late. They had to rally just to make they rallied twice against Oregon State, but in both games, and this one came up short. They shouldn't have had to rally in either, honestly. So disappointing. I mean, again, they're more of a work in progress than I thought they would be going into the season. But after the wins over Utah and Colorado, I certainly expected more from them this past week.
Yeah, I think at this point, I mean, you want to see them play well to get momentum. Obviously, there's going to be a week off before the NCAA tournament, so plenty of time to, if any bad things happen, to get that negativity out of the way. But at this point, I think, Arizona's playing far away from home, and it's going to be an uphill battle to get to the Sweet 16. It's kind of disappointing. And I know Adia would say the same thing. And I feel bad. Kate Reese stuck around. Jade LaVille. Listen, this team has players. Shayna Pellington, who was phenomenal last weekend. They can make a run. If Arizona makes Sweet 16, I'm not surprised. And I'll tell you what, I think there's a legitimate possibility that the women go further than the men. I really did.
The one thing about this team, the last couple of weeks notwithstanding, they've actually home court hasn't meant a lot to them. In other words, they're more than capable of winning games on the road. I know they didn't in Oregon, but they beat UCLA and they beat USC on the road. They won essentially a road game against Baylor earlier in the year, so they're capable of doing it. So, getting home court would be great. But on the flip side, how many they've lost a few times at home. So and they lost at home last year to North Carolina in the round of 32. So it doesn't mean everything.
No, you're right. Just disappointing for sure. Now let's talk to Jerry Palm, get his feelings on the men's tournament and what the bracketology looks like. What's the best case scenario for Arizona and what's the worst case here on Wildcat Country? Scooby, we sent you an ice shaker. They are a sponsor, courtesy of our buddy Chris Gronkowski. You have it right there.
I love my ice shaker. Fun fact: when I trained with Glenn Gronkowski, everybody, when we were trained together, people thought I was the other Gronk brother. So it's kind of funny. But yes, I love my ice shaker. It is very good. I use it every day. I am a veteran to the ice shaker game, by the way.
What's up, Wildcat Country? Chris Gronkowski here. Use coupon code Wildcat Country at iceshaker.com.
Shane, very glad to be joined by CBS's expert bracketologist. You see him for bold predictions in the fall. You see him for bracketology pretty much any time after that. Jerry Palm joining us here on Wildcat Country. Jerry, I mean, we set this up last week, and we're excited to have you on. And then things happened on Saturday that we just didn't expect for our Arizona Wildcats. Now, the first question is, what is the best case scenario, assuming Arizona wins out over both LA schools next week and then wins the Pac-12 tournament? What's the best case? And then at the same time, what's the worst case if they lose to both the LA schools and lose their first game in the Pac-12 tournament? Where could they end up?
Yeah, the worst case is a little bit harder to predict because it'll depend on what other teams do as well. Lose all the way out. So you're losing to both LA schools and some bottom feeder in the Pac-12. And, that's the one that hurts, right? I mean, USC is the middle of the bracket team. Maybe I've got them in the bottom half, still kind of on the bubble. But UCLA, no shame in losing to them. But then you lose to somebody like Stanford again. Yeah. But here's the thing. Arizona's not going to lose to UCLA because what we have determined about Arizona is they only lose to teams that aren't going to the NCAA tournament.
True.
5 losses, all of them to teams. I mean, and maybe Arizona State will rally or Oregon will rally and get in, but probably not going to the NCAA tournament. 5 wins over teams in the top 20 of the net. So, if Arizona can just get through the first weekend, that's where the danger is. That's where the teams that beat them live. Then maybe they can go all the way. But it's a very schizophrenic resume, and inconsistent is probably a better word. But it's just maddening that all of their losses, 5 losses to teams that are probably going nowhere, and that's really hard to fathom. Then you look at UCLA, for example. UCLA has got 4 decent losses. They lost to USC on the road, but the other 3 teams that beat them were all pretty good, and their best win is Maryland. And Maryland is middle of the bracket, 7th, and people are talking about them as potential national champions. I've seen them live. They're really good, but you're not going to get a 1 seed if your best win is Maryland at the end of the day. So, for Arizona, a 1 is probably still in play, but those losses, when you look at the teams you're competing with for the top line of the bracket, those losses really stand out. Nobody's got anything like that. All of these teams have got good wins, but nobody has losses like that. And so one might be a stretch for Arizona, especially now after yesterday. But a 2 is still in play. And if things go sideways, they could be a 4 or 5 because they're definitely hurting themselves as they move through this schedule. But especially if you're talking about taking a quad 3 or 4 loss in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament.
Yeah, Jerry, one thing that stuck out to me last week during the pre-selection reveal that had Arizona 6 and UCLA 8, and I know things have moved since then, but it seems like this year's committee anyway is placing a higher emphasis on quality wins over some bad losses because Arizona definitely has plenty of both, but they have more on the good side than on the bad side. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that when in doubt, they're going to go with the team that's got, the better wins. If there's some doubt. But UCLA, like I said, UCLA and Arizona's resumes are very different, right? Yeah. I mean, the losses definitely favor UCLA, but, it's not just that the wins are different, but the wins are markedly different. They have 5 top 20 wins, Arizona does, and UCLA's got 0. Unless Maryland moves up into the top 20 of the net after winning today, but it's still not a top 20 team, even if they're in the top 20 of the net. And then Arizona's wins are legit top 20 teams. So it's just very different. But yes, that was my takeaway as well. And you saw it on the top line of the bracket too, with Alabama and Houston being ahead of Purdue and Kansas, even though Purdue and Kansas have got. Well, I think at that time, Alabama and Purdue had the same number of losses, and then Purdue has lost again since. But Purdue's schedule stronger, quality wins stronger, but Alabama beat Houston, and that's the best win that any of those 4 teams had at the time. And so they saw that as a differentiator as they discussed those 4 teams. I don't know why Houston is still ahead of Purdue and Kansas in that case, but Things have changed now anyway. But Purdue is the only team that has lost since then, and that was just yesterday. Was Purdue's first loss since the bracket reveal. So, but that they thought that those 4 teams were pretty solidly on the top line. Purdue will probably stay on the top line of my bracket Monday, but only because Texas and Arizona both lost behind.
Yeah, it's how big a deal, Jerry, is are the conference tournaments? In other words, if Arizona goes on the road and they sweep UCLA and USC, and maybe presumably reestablish themselves as the 2 seed in the West in that scenario, is there a way that UCLA could leapfrog them in the Pac-12 tournament if it comes down to them in the championship game?
Well, they would probably have to actually beat Arizona in order to have a chance to leapfrog them. Even then, they're 1 and 2 head to head, right? So I don't know if that would actually work. I mean, UCLA has had the head to head win now, right? Or
no, Arizona beat them.
Arizona beat them.
Arizona won the first one. You're right.
Yeah,
okay, so that's obviously part of why they're ahead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So
our conference tournaments that like how big? I'm trying to ask, like, how big does the committee weigh conference tournaments? Or
they don't weigh those. The conference tournament by itself, like your performance in your conference tournament, doesn't mean anything. So I get asked a lot, how far do we have to go in our conference tournament to make the field? Well, the committee doesn't care how far you go. There's no how far you went concept. However, those are neutral court games, sometimes against good teams. So you get a chance to prove yourself away from home. So those are good games, usually, but they're not special. The only thing they care about in terms of conference performance, whether it's regular season or tournament, is who's the automatic qualifier. Otherwise, this is just another game or 2 or 3 that you're adding to your schedule at the end of the season. They're going to count the same as if they had played them in January. The only difference is these are usually neutral court games, especially for the bigger conferences. They all are neutral court games. And so there's a little weight given to being able to play away from home.
All right, so Jerry, here's a scenario that I think is fairly realistic for Arizona. So they beat USC on Thursday. They lose to UCLA on Saturday because Arizona, 4 of their 5 losses are on a Saturday for some inexplicable reason. I can't figure it out. All right, so then they get to the Pac-12
Friday night
tournament.
life must be pretty good there, huh?
Right, yeah, clearly. So Arizona loses obviously the regular season. UCLA is the number 1 seed, or they win the Pac-12 regular season title. So you go to the Pac-12 tournament, and Arizona beats UCLA in that scenario in the championship. Does Arizona get the number 2 seed in the West in that scenario over UCLA?
Well, I think based on what the committee has done already this year, I would say they're probably going to lean Arizona. It's different because they have that loss to Arizona State now.
Right.
And UCLA, Arizona would have 2 out of 3. So they're probably leaning Arizona. I don't know if that's 2 seed in the West because that depends on what other teams do.
Right.
Sure.
But and what's funny is Arizona could be a 2, but not necessarily in the West because if they're 7 or 8 overall and somebody else is closer to the West before they get on the board, they may not get the West.
And UCLA gets the 3 in
be
the West.
3
yeah.
And end up in the West because of just the way, the teams go in the bracket. So, but I think that Arizona would be ahead of UCLA on their 1 to 68 list. And how that works out as far as the regionals are concerned, it would really depend on what other teams are there.
So we're really glad to have you on, in part because you can answer this question more fair than I've seen anyone be able to answer it ever. Everybody from Arizona thinks that there's a conspiracy among the NCAA Tournament Committee that they're going to play Gonzaga or Xavier at some point if the seeds come up that way. Is this a thing among the tournament? Like, do they look at it and say, oh, we got Sean Miller, we got to put Sean Miller against Arizona or something like that?
I see.
The committee did it twice. When Sean Miller was coach at Arizona, they played Xavier twice in the tournament.
Yeah, that's not a thing. It's just,
okay.
Here's the thing. Bracketing is very regimented, very. That you go through 1 to 68, you're putting teams in the bracket where they fit best geographically. You keep teams apart from your conference, and you try to avoid regular season rematches with non-conference foes in the first round anyway. But even that's not a hard and fast rule. But the conference separation rules are pretty hard and fast. So, and you're always trying to put the team as close to home as you possibly can. For the top 4 seeds, it's regional and sub-regional. Once you get past the 4s, they're only focused on the first and second rounds. But that's it. I mean, it's really regimented. And so sometimes you end up with a matchup like that. And sometimes you can see the bracket, if you bother to look, and see matchups that could have happened but didn't. And for every one that you think the committee has put together, I can give you 3 that they didn't. So it's really, they have these rules that they follow. I can do a bracket. If you give me 1 to 68, I can do a bracket in like 10 minutes because you just go through and you follow all the rules.
Yeah.
Now, that's a 12-person committee. A 12-person committee can't order lunch in 10 minutes, but it's a process. And the funny thing about that is also fans of a given school will know about those things. The people in that room are not actively thinking about it. And not only that, it's at the end of a 5-day meeting. They're getting a little punchy by then, so they're not thinking, oh my gosh, we got to put Sean Miller with. They're just like, can we just get the bracket done and go home?
Just want to get to lunch. Yeah. Or dinner.
So it's I mean, I'm not saying they don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Bracketing, they do take bracketing seriously.
But they have a couple games.
Sometimes they're putting together 8 brackets because they have contingencies based on the Sunday results.
Right. I was going to say, because they have a couple, like the Big Ten championship game is always like right before the bracket reveal. It's
exactly.
There
are at least 4 conference championships on that day.
Yeah.
So they have to have contingencies for most of the time they will have a contingency. There is the rare time where the result isn't going to impact the bracket, but most of the time it does.
Jerry, let me get your thoughts on a game of would you rather, I guess. Would you rather be a top seed somewhere away from home or a lower seed, like a 2 or 3 closer to home? Like Arizona would play the West Regional in Las Vegas if they got that far. And I think back to 2011 when a 5-seeded Arizona team beat number 1 seed Duke in what was essentially a home game for Arizona and California. Then last year, on the flip side, Arizona was a 1 seed in Texas, lost to 5-seed Houston. Is there anything to like maybe being a lower seed but being closer to home?
Yes, actually. I think that is a thing. I think for the most part, people would like to be where their fans can go and they can get good support. That's not always possible. It's just, I mean, it might be that the regions don't set up for your fans to make an easy trip of things. It just, that's just the way it is sometimes. But that's why when I was talking about the bracketing process and how regimented it was and why geography was so important, that's why. Because the schools told the committee, look, we want to play close to home. If we can play close to home, we want to play close to home. So they relaxed some of the bracketing rules so they're not swapping seeds so much. And they're trying to get teams in the bracket that, in priority order, you earn it. The farther up the bracket you are, the more you've earned it. But as best they can, they want teams to play close to home because the fans want to go and they want to make it easy on them for them to go.
All right, I got 2 more questions for you, Jerry, and we really do appreciate your time, both Eric and I. Much appreciate it. Make a prediction. How many Pac-12 teams get into the tournament?
3. Arizona, UCLA, and then either USC or somebody makes a run like Arizona State, but probably takes out USC in the process.
Is ASU out still as of now?
Is who?
ASU.
Yes.
Okay. I thought the win over Arizona might be enough to sneak them in.
But it was so fluky, though. I mean, it was such a
win.
Doesn't
matter. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Fluky doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
The line drive in the box score.
Right. And my last question for you, because I asked Dennis Dodd this last week, and I have to ask you. Mick Cronin said after that pre-bracket reveal that, or at least he hinted at the fact that UCLA is leaving for the Big Ten. The committee somehow has it out for them and seated them lower than because they had them at 8. He thought they should be higher. Is there a conspiracy theory in there somewhere? Is he onto something, or is he crazy?
I'm not going to say Mick is crazy. I will say that one of the most surprising things about the bracket reveal was that Mick is buying into some conspiracy theory that really nobody cares about. I mean, who's on the committee that's going to care that they're moving to the Big Ten?
Yeah.
The Pac-12 rep on the committee might care. Maybe not. But
our athletic director.
That's 1 vote out of 12. So, I don't know off the top of my head who the Pac-12 rep on the committee is.
It's Arizona's AD, actually.
Is it Hickey?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
All right.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there isn't really anything that they can do. It's a 12-person committee. Maybe one person cares about that. I mean, I got a good laugh out of that. I usually think of Mick as being a little more put together than that, but yeah, that's just that's just nuts. I mean, there's a case for UCLA to be higher. We talked about that, but they weren't going to be a 1 seed with their best win still being Maryland.
All right. So, Jerry, my last question. If you were to go on record today, how many teams have a realistic chance of winning it all, in your opinion?
Oh, 8, 9, 10. The thing that makes this tournament different than some of the other years is that there's no dominant team. Even though the 4 number ones have been the best teams most of the year, to the point where they can take a loss and still stay on that line, they're not that much better than everybody else. The NCAA tournament is always about matchups, but there have been a couple of teams in each tournament, like Gonzaga and Baylor a couple of years ago, where it's like, the matchup isn't going to matter for those guys until we get deeper into the tournament. Their talent will overwhelm. This year, that's not so much the case. I mean, yes, the 1 should beat the 16s on talent alone, but once you get past the first round, and maybe even for some teams in the first round, the matchups are going to matter a lot, even to the 1 seeds, because those teams are very good and they've been consistently good all year, and that's why they're up there, but they can be had. And there are matchup problems for each of those teams that if they come across it in the bracket, could end up knocking them out. And so good luck filling out a bracket this year, because people say, well, who's your favorite to win the tournament? So I got to see a bracket first. I got to see who these teams are going to play, because the matchups are definitely going to matter.
I just learned so much in the 15 minutes that we had with you, Jerry. Thank you for kind of explaining the bracket process, as I've never had it personally explained before. So it's really great to have you. And I guarantee you we're going to try to reach out to you before football season, because we're going to want to hear your bowl predictions as to why Arizona is in or not in in those in August. So thank you so much for joining Shane and I.
Sure, anytime. Thanks for having me on.
If you're looking to add value to your sports cards, you've got to check out dtsportscards.com. They're an authorized dealer for PSA, which means you'll get great prices on your submissions if you go through them. And for just $2 a card, DT Sports Cards will take a close look at each card you submit and let you know whether it's worth grading. I just submitted some high-end hockey cards. They took a very close look, said they're good to go, and they all earned a PSA 10 grade, which tripled the value of each card. DT Sports Cards is located right here in Arizona. They provide quick, personalized service through email or direct messages. Find them online at dtsportscards.com and check them out on Instagram at dt_sportscards.
Great to talk to Jerry Palm. Thanks to him for joining us. Shane, anything that he said that kind of stood out to you that was a surprise?
No, it was interesting to hear him talk about the conference tournaments, and it's a good point because the selection committee has to really scramble late to see teams based on the outcome of these tournaments. I mean, it's crazy how many games there are right before the selection show. Yeah. So that's part of it. And then I think he also made a good point, is that, Arizona's prize for beating UCLA could be getting a 2 seed, but not in the West, and UCLA could get a 3 in the West, so it's kind of random. Arizona, when they, like I mentioned, when they beat Duke in 2011, they were a 5 seed, but they were in the West. And then last year they were a 1 seed, but they were in the South. So sometimes you're not rewarded for that. But it very good points from Jerry. And I think he's spot on. And also interesting to think that he doesn't, or to hear from him, that he doesn't think ASU is in as of now, which means they probably have to at least split against the LA schools to have a chance.
I think they have to split against the LA schools and get to Friday of the Pac-12 tournament.
Could be.
At least. Shane, I want to ask you about, just kind of Arizona's mindset going forward. If you for both teams, both the men's and women's basketball teams, how do you think both teams respond this week? Do you expect to see them maybe a little disappointed based on what we saw this weekend, or do you expect them to come out and play with some fire?
Well, on the women's side, it'll be interesting to see how they do against. We're going to assume UCLA. I know we haven't gotten to our predictions yet, but they got the 4 seed in the Pac-12 women's tournament, which means they get that first round bye. UCLA is going to play ASU in the first round. UCLA very likely to win that game, so we're very likely to get an Arizona UCLA rematch of their double overtime game. Or that was a single overtime game? They played USC in double overtime. Getting my overtimes mixed up, but I think they'll play better Home court doesn't seem to mean a lot to them, which is kind of surprising because home court has been so good for them this past season. The fans have turned out in good numbers, but I expect them to be better. They've responded to losses pretty well, and then they're very up and down. So the up seems to be coming. I know that's kind of simplistic, but I think they'll respond well. And then on the men's side, I think, Charles Barkley always said you can learn as much from almost losing as you can from actually losing, or, it's like, in other words, you don't have to lose to learn. I don't know if I agree with that, even though he played the game and I didn't. I feel like sometimes getting a kick in the pants like that might actually be more beneficial than dodging a bullet. So I expect them to come out and play well against USC. I think that I would predict that they would win that game. UCLA, and you talked about those Saturday games. I think that's going to be more of an uphill battle. I don't think UCLA has lost a game at home this year. So that's going to be tougher. But I expect, to answer your question, I expect both teams to play better this week than they have in the past week. It's just a matter of if the results are going to reflect that.
So I want to mention, first of all, this segment is brought to you by DT Sports Cards. You can see their logo behind me. Shane, you got a chance to see DT Sports Cards over at the Chandler Gilbert Card Show yesterday, which is Saturday when we're recording this, obviously on Sunday.
Yep. And I want to mention real quick, I just got another order back from them, a bulk sub from PSA, 24 out of 38 Gem Mint 10s.
Wow.
DT Sports Cards does a fantastic job. If you submit cards to PSA, go through him. I'm telling you.
Awesome. Boy, that is congratulations. That's great stuff. All right, let's time to make some predictions. But before we do, just kind of mention softball and baseball. We'll talk more about them in future weeks. Softball won 3 out of 5 in Arkansas. They beat Drake twice. They went 1-2 against Arkansas, who is in the top 10. So a winning weekend for them. So good for them. Baseball lost the first 2 games to West Virginia. And as we were recording this on Sunday afternoon, the baseball team is up big on West Virginia, so likely a 1-2 weekend, barring an absolute collapse on Sunday. Not their best. Both teams have seemingly easier opponents, not ranked opponents, coming up this weekend, and should get some W's. We will talk more about them, obviously, in the coming weeks. But all right, Shane, let us start with our first predictions. Let's go to the women's Pac-12 tournament. Arizona, as you mentioned, the 4 seed, they play at 1 o'clock Mountain Time on Thursday against the winner of UCLA and Arizona State. How far do the Wildcats go in the Pac-12 tournament?
Well, they're not getting past Stanford in the semifinals. They just don't match up well with Stanford at all. A few teams do. I think they find a way to get past UCLA. Again, I'm assuming that UCLA beats an ASU team that's 1-17 in the conference.
Probably.
Yeah, but I think ASU actually got a split of the Oregon schools, so go figure. But I think they beat they find a way to beat UCLA in another close game, but I think they get blown out by Stanford for a third time.
Okay, I would agree with you. I think they beat UCLA as well, and I think if they don't beat UCLA, I'm really concerned heading into the big dance, and Adia better flip a switch, because I expect Arizona to play Stanford close. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think they're going to keep the game reasonably interesting until the second half. How about that?
That's fair.
But if that's fair. Remember, Shane and I also said last week on the show, the ASU game on the men's team, we said, now I was wrong about the women. I thought they'd go 2-0. I was incorrect about that, but we
thought
both
they would
said
split.
that.
We were both wrong on the women. Yeah.
We were both concerned about the ASU basketball, the men's game. We were like, it's going to be tight. I mean, we didn't think it'd be like that, but we thought it would be uncomfortable, which was the word that I used last week. So we are pretty good with these picks.
Although I did think it was going to be a lower scoring game. I didn't think it was going to be a high scoring game. If it was a high scoring game, I would have thought Arizona would have won by double digits.
They should have. All right, Shane, on to the weekend. I know we're picking these games early because it's only Sunday, and the first game is on Thursday against USC. Once again, how does Arizona do against both teams? Kind of give me an overview of what you expect to see on Thursday and Saturday.
Yeah, I think USC is going to face a very angry Arizona team on Thursday. And remember that Wildcats blew out USC on the road last year.
2 years in a row, Shane. 2 years in a row, Arizona's won that game. Yeah, and
I don't think it's going to be a blowout this time, but I think Arizona finds a way to win. I think it was a wake up call. A wake up call that it wouldn't have been as big a wake up call had they not lost that game. So I think they're gonna punch USC in the mouth. It's not going to be pretty necessarily, but I think they win. UCLA, I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to go back and forth. I think the Bruins, they're undefeated at home. You can argue who the better team is. I think UCLA is probably a slightly more well-rounded team on both sides of the ball. That game in Tucson was a little weird. It was so low scoring.
Very weird. Yeah.
So I think I just can't pick Arizona to win that game. It wouldn't shock me. But I think they get a split. I think they beat UCLA and then lose a close game to the Bruins.
Oh, you mean they beat USC on Thursday? And
USC,
then
excuse me. Yes.
I think Arizona, for some reason, plays well at the Galen Center, and they've won 2 years in a row, even with inferior teams. I think a couple of years ago, they had an inferior team against Evan Mobley, who went on to be a lottery pick in the NCAA or in the NBA draft. I think Arizona wins this game 7 points-ish, and I think if you can get the line around 3 or 4, now I don't know where that's going to end up. I think they're probably a solid bet. On Saturday, though, Shane, Arizona has lost 5 games this year. They lost on a Thursday to Utah in December, and they've lost 4 times since January on a Saturday.
Yeah.
I think UCLA blows them out. I think it's a double-digit game. Once again, I mean, I think Arizona gets it put on them here. Whatever the spread is, I think UCLA covers. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm eating crow there, figuratively.
Similar to last year, you think? Because UCLA blew them out at
yeah. I expect UCLA to put it on them pretty good. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen in the Pac-12 tournament. We'll obviously talk about that in next week's show. But I expect UCLA to win this game comfortably. Now, if Arizona loses on Thursday night, then I'm starting to get concerned. USC is a desperate team. Yeah. But I think this is where Arizona asserts its will to say, hey, we are still a legitimate top 12 team in the country. And to be a top 12 team, you have to win this game. I don't care what really happens. If they win on Thursday, I don't care if you lose by 40 to UCLA. Honestly,
if they don't respond strongly on Thursday, I'm going to be very disappointed because there's no reason for them not to.
Well, let's hope, Shane, that next week's show is more positive than we had this week. It was this one was a tough one, but I hope you guys enjoyed kind of our, we all kind of went through the misery together here on this program, and really appreciate you guys listening. Thanks to Jerry Palm for making his debut appearance on the show. For Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. As always, bear down.